It's election season here in the US, so let's talk about politics. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. This is something a lot of people ask me about, people on Twitter, people who follow, especially people who follow my campaign diaries. They perceive my game as being politically complex. And in fact, one of my players, Phil, turned to TJ in the first or second session I was running at Turtle Rock Studios and said, I feel like we just got dropped into the middle of Game of Thrones without a glossary. And I took that as a compliment, actually. I tell my players that my game tends to be about humans and human politics. But I don't really think of it as being complex. It's just that there are politics in my world, and several people who follow my campaign diaries have asked and said, how do I do that? I want that in my game. So if you watch this video and you do all the things I describe, you will at the end of that process have a politically sophisticated campaign. I think. I don't know, actually. I have no idea if this is going to work because no one ever taught me this. This isn't something I read and then did. There's no list of instructions. A lot of the stuff people ask me about, especially on Twitter, there seems to be this perception that whatever the question is, whatever the problem they're having is, I will have a list of checkboxes, and if you do all of these things, that will solve your problem. But often when people ask me stuff, like for instance politics, I'm like, well, I know how I do it, but I don't know how I learned it. So we're going to find out together whether or not I can explain it well. Let's just say at the end of this video, you will have watched a video. That's the best I can do. Let's start by talking about central tensions. I think that any good political game needs to have a central tension, and that is the driving force behind all the conflict in the world. I don't necessarily think all games need a central tension. I don't think all stories need a central tension, but a lot of good ones have it. And for me, my political games, and not all the campaigns I run are political, my political games always start with a central tension. This is also a good, just general storytelling mechanism. When you know what your campaign's central tension is, a lot of answers about your campaign's politics just fall out of that. You've already done a lot of your work once you've established what the central tension is. A classic example is the American Civil War. The Civil War is a great example of a central tension because it's very sophisticated, it has lots of layers. There's the folks in charge, the folks running the war, who are fighting for ostensibly states' rights, but the right that they were trying to protect was the right to keep slaves. And that is evil. It's one of the most evil things that has ever happened in American history, and we are still paying for it. But a lot of the people fighting in the Civil War weren't fighting to keep slaves. They didn't have any slaves. They were just the rank and file soldiers. And when asked, why are you fighting us by the Northerners, the South would say, because you're here. It was called the War of Northern Aggression. The Northern armies were trying to subjugate the South. So that gives you lots of great different points of view. That's the thing that's great about a good central tension is it gives you lots of different angles that you can look at it. And there are people on both sides. There are, obviously there are Northerners who are fighting because they think that the South's tradition of slavery, their peculiar institution, was evil. But there are lots of people fighting on the North because it was an opportunity to make money. There was a lot of money to be had in war. There always is. So now you've got this one central tension, the North versus the South. You've got people fighting for federalism versus states' rights. You've got people fighting for slavery versus freedom. So think about all the different angles you get out of this one central tension. Out of the Civil War, you get a geographic tension, the North versus the South. You get an ideological tension. You get liberty versus slavery. You have people fighting for their homes. You have people that are in it for the money. You have people in favor of the war. You have people opposed to the war. You have people in favor of the war on both sides and people opposed to the war on both sides. So that's one central tension. It's one conflict. And from that sprouts all these different points of view, all these different opportunities, all these different burdens the characters have to shoulder. The American Civil War is also great because it was a war that had subtext. There was the reason they said the war was happening. We're fighting for liberty and states' rights. But then there was the subtext. There was the reason war was really happening, which was slavery. And then there are layers below that where people are like, look, I don't care about slavery one way or the other. I'm just fighting for my home or fighting to make money. There are people who fight just because they're good at it. It's the only life they've ever known. It's the only thing they've ever been good at. They don't care about slavery or freedom or states' rights. I'm thinking of, this is a different war, but I'm thinking of Robert Duvall's character from Apocalypse Now. There's a great quote in Apocalypse Now that I think everyone misses. Everyone quotes the, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, but then Robert Duvall he describes the scene about bombing the Vietnamese and about the smell of napalm, and then there's a beat, and Robert Duvall stops, and he looks around, and he says, someday this war is going to end. And that is his character's thesis statement. He is a character what is that guy going to do after the war is over? Is he going to go back to America and sell cars? No, he's never going to be anyone but this dude who led this battle. And then you have characters that fight because it's their duty, because they feel honor. Maybe they hate slavery, but they feel honor bound to defend their country because that was their way of life. Honor was a big part of the Southern culture back then. And I'm not sure this is something that most people know now, but if you were an American growing up in the 1950s or 60s, back when the Western dominated the media, like 7 out of the 10 top TV shows in the 1950s were all Westerns, right? Everyone then understood that the Western took place in a world after the Civil War. A lot of the characters you get in Westerns are the villains are ex-Confederate soldiers and the heroes are ex-Union soldiers. Elvis Mitchell was interviewing Quentin Tarantino about The Hateful Eight, which I got to see in 70mm. That was fantastic. And he's interviewing Quentin Tarantino on The Treatment, which is his radio show on KCRW, which you can get as a podcast. And he says, you made a post-apocalyptic movie set after a real apocalypse. And when I thought about that, I was like, holy crap, he's right? For a lot of the characters in The Hateful Eight, the Civil War was an apocalypse. It destroyed the Southern way of life. I mean, you could argue that maybe it didn't destroy it enough. But all of these characters all get together in this desolate landscape, right? Like a post-apocalyptic landscape. They're huddled together for survival. They're fighting against each other. They don't know who they can trust. And many of them are the survivors of a dead way of life. And I thought that was a great insight. Many Westerns are informed by the Civil War. There's lots of different central tensions. There's the classic Roman central tension, which you are familiar with in Another Guise, between Empire and Republic. I'm familiar with it from I, Claudius, which if you haven't watched the PBS miniseries I, Claudius, I think a lot of my understanding of politics in drama comes from I, Claudius. I, Claudius is basically a story about someone who is pro-republic. He misses the days of democracy and the Senate, but now he lives in what is essentially a dictatorship run by an emperor, but that emperor is like his uncle. So he is simultaneously somebody who is royalty, someone who is a man of privilege, but he's also a scholar and an idealist, and he misses the republic, and he is of a generation of people that think, that hope, that the emperor is brief, that the emperor will not become this hereditary title, that the emperor will someday step down. And that wasn't as crazy an idea as it sounds. There's a great game that I'm not sure I can recommend you play because in this day and age, it would be considered, it's the most complex board game I have ever played. I've got a copy of it here. It's called Republic of Rome, but it does a great job of showing you how Rome went from being a republic to being an empire. Empires are things that have emperors, by the way. I often hear people use the term empire and they don't realize that all an empire is that place ruled by an emperor. So if you have an empire, that means you have an emperor. Republic of Rome is an Avalon Hill bookcase game that I think it's from the late 80s. I think it might be the first, at least the first example I know of a cooperative game. All the players are playing members of the Senate, right? This is before there was a Roman Empire, before there was an emperor, and they're trying to stop Rome from collapsing. They're always under threat of civil unrest and of threats from war from without. Every turn you flip over an event from a deck, and sometimes it's a war, and sometimes it's the leader who goes with that war. So now that war is even tougher and harder to fight, and you and the other players have to vote who are we going to send to command the army to stop that war. We have to work together to stop the war because if we lose the war, then the Republic of Rome falls and all players lose. This was the first game I had ever encountered where all players could lose. We have to vote and argue and figure out who are we going to send to defeat that battle. If we send our, like maybe I can tell, everyone can tell looking at you and the people you control, that you control the best general in the game. If we all vote to send that general to stop the war, then he will definitely beat the war and Rome will not fall. However, your general is also incredibly popular back home. If he comes back having won a war, he will declare himself emperor. And the people will go for it. So we obviously can't send him. We have to pick somebody much more unpopular, right? Someone who the people are not instantly going to rally around when they come home. But unfortunately, those people are not very good at fighting wars. That mechanism, the idea of the Senate trying to figure out who we're going to send to fight this war, we have to be careful. If we send somebody who's too powerful and too charismatic, yeah, they'll win the war, but then they'll declare themselves emperor. That's how Julius Caesar became emperor. And you get to play through that and you start to understand, oh, this is how the central tension of Republic versus Empire developed and evolved and ultimately settled itself. The central tension of Republic versus Empire is interesting because the Republic is perceived by some people to be virtuous. It is democratic, but at the same time, it was completely ineffective and it had become old and corrupt. Most of the mechanisms and institutions in the Roman Republic existed at this point, or at one point, just to further themselves and protect their cushy jobs. So when things needed to be done, the people could not rely on the government of the Republic to get them done. That's why someone like Julius Caesar, who was a charismatic military leader, was able to take over, and people liked him. They liked the fact that he got stuff done. So the matter of Rome, the issue of Republic versus Empire, is a little less cut and dry. It doesn't have good and evil. There were people who definitely thought that Julius Caesar it was a morally bad thing for him to declare himself imperator. But there were other people who thought this is great, this is fantastic, because he's going to get stuff done. And he did, by the way. So you have a multifaceted central conflict. You have idealists, you have pragmatists, you have people who are benefiting from the corruption, and those people are on the idealists' side in many ways. And then you have people making money hand over fist off war, and the empire fed off war. You are, of course, familiar with the central conflict of the matter of Rome because it's something George Lucas stole for Star Wars. There's a great scene in that first movie from 1977 where there's a committee meeting, right? A bunch of guys in black all get together, and Grand Moff Tarkin says that the Emperor has taken over and disbanded the Senate. And these are people working for the emperor, and they're like, how is that going to work? This is an example of how a central tension can be simple, but it reveals complexities. People are trying to figure out, how can we govern without a Senate? And Grand Moff Tarkin says the planetary governors are going to keep running things. So if you live on a planet in this galaxy, from your point of view, nothing's changed. You had a governor before, and he reported to the Senate, and you still have a governor. They just report to the emperor. Like Westerns with the Civil War, you can tell a lot of stories in this kind of Star Wars milieu with the Republic versus the Empire, with lots of characters who don't really care about one side or the other. It's just something in the backdrop. It's just an opportunity. The central tension is something that can inform the people you meet in the world, but it doesn't have to. A lot of normal people are very far removed from the central tension typically. When you talk about politics, you're talking about a very top-down way of looking at things. The advice I give new dungeon masters is, you don't need any of this stuff. You can just start with a town. You don't even need a map of the town. Remember the first couple of videos? You don't even need a map of the town. You just need to know it exists. You need to know the names of a couple of people that live there, and there has to be something that happens. The goblins kidnap the blacksmith's daughter, and now you're off. That's all you need. Something like a central tension is something you can add over time. You don't need it to get started. What's another great central tension? The Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of different stories, movies, books came out of, many different episodes of television came out of the Cold War. A lot of writers miss the Cold War because it was both simple, right? Us versus them, good guys versus bad guys, people on each side thinking that they were the good guys, but also incredibly complex. That's the great thing about a central tension is there's two sides, but then there's layers and layers and layers of people who see each side differently and benefit, people on both sides who benefit from from maintaining the status quo, people who benefit from disrupting the status quo. We'll talk about that later in this video. So the Cold War is fantastic because of these two superpowers. You had stories about people defecting from one side or the other. You had spies. I mean, there were spies in the Civil War. I think the Cold War actually is pretty useful for fantasy games. It's very easy to create a fantasy setting with two superpowers in it. This is where we get the idea of the first world and the second world and the third world. The first world was the United States and her allies. The second world was the Soviet Union and her allies. And of course, it was the CIA that came up with this. So the first world, the best world, was their world. That's their point of view. But then third world countries were countries that weren't allied with either organization, mostly because they were too resource poor to be of value. That's where we get the idea of third world countries being poor countries. So I love the idea of the Cold War. In fact, I constantly think about trying to steal it for my campaign setting. I've never really gotten around to it, but I love the idea of these two superpowers with their satellite states. And then you can set a game. My favorite TV show of all time is The Sandbaggers. It's it's a British spy show. And the fact that it's all about spies in Britain means you get all sorts there's the Cold War, you get all sorts of great tension, but also the UK is not the United States. They don't have their organization, MI6 it's broke compared to the CIA. They always talk about how the CIA has way more money than they do. That's a lot of fun. The idea that your campaign is set not in a fantasy analog of the US or the USSR, but a fantasy analog of like Germany or the UK, one of these client states that depends on the larger state for protection. What's another great central tension? This is, I think, maybe the most obscure of all the stuff we're going to talk about. But for my money, the best story in games, the best story in any game, video game, board game, card game, comes from a collectible card game from 1995 called Legend of the Five Rings. I think the clan war story from 1995 to 1997 is the best story I have ever seen in any game. I do not know why more companies don't rip off the way they did that. But this isn't that video. This isn't about that story. It's about the central tension of Legend of the Five Rings. L5R, as they called it, took place in fantasy Japan. There was an emperor, and he ruled over 5 great clans, kind of like the great houses from Dune. The emperor was powerful, the people were loyal to the emperor and loved the emperor, and the emperor was able to keep all 5 of these clans. Each one had a lot of power. He was able to play them off against each other so that none of them became too powerful, and that was the story before the game starts. But then the emperor is poisoned, and when the emperor is poisoned, he's unable to rule, and now there's a war. That's the clan war. There's a war between the 5 clans to see who will be his successor. This is a much more complex central tension than the ones you get with the Civil War or Rome or the Cold War, because instead of there being 2 sides, there's at least 5 sides in the clan war. And they released other clans, minor clans, some of whom became major clans. And there were alliances between the clans, and alliances were made and broken. It was like diplomacy. This was a very politically sophisticated setting. I think you might have been able to break it all down into people who supported the emperor and people who thought the emperor was weak and needed to be replaced. No one was anti the idea of emperor, by the way. This was not like the matter of Rome. There was no one proposing that we should be a democratic republic. It was all about which head of which great clan was going to be the next emperor, and that is a very fertile environment for a fantasy game. Every clan had people in it who thought we should be the next emperor, and people in it who thought, no, the imperial house should continue ruling. We should find out who poisoned him, and we should bring them to justice. Other people saw the poisoned emperor as an opportunity to put their own people in charge, or again, make money off the situation. You've seen central tensions in stuff like Marvel's Civil War, right? It's not just Captain America versus Tony Stark. Each of these characters represents an ideology, the idea that we should be beholden to the civil authorities, and the other point of view, which is that the civil authorities are corrupt, and only by staying away from them will we be able to be effective. When done right, and I'm not sure I've seen that story done right, both sides are well represented and well argued. So that when Tony Stark is talking, you're like, actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But then when Captain America talks, you go, no, wait, that makes a lot of sense. There was a great, if you were as old as I am, there was a great TV show in the 1970s called Battlestar Galactica. And there was a multi-part story arc that had a great central tension in it. Because the story of Battlestar Galactica is the story of these humans, the last survivors of the human race, these people think, limping across the galaxy, protected against the enemy threat of the Cylons by a single warship, the Battlestar Galactica. And they've spent the entire series up until this point just trying to survive, just running away. They've made no heroic last stands because they know they would die. And this is a situation where if they lose one battle, not only have they lost the war, but the human race is extinct. That's one great central tension right there, the humans versus the Cylons, and the stakes are the entire human race. But then, in one episode, they find another Battlestar, another warship captained by Commander Kane. And they picked a great actor, a great classic movie actor to play this character. They picked Lloyd Bridges, who made a great commanding officer, and he was an active warrior. The commander of the Battlestar Galactica was Commander Adama, and he was a diplomat. Right away, you can see how the central tension is developing. They wrote it on purpose. They created this other Battlestar's leader on purpose to contrast him against Commander Adama. Commander Adama is about survival. Commander Adama is trying to keep things peaceful, whereas Commander Kane is a warrior, and all the people on his ship are soldiers. Commander Kane does not have a whole fleet of humans he's trying to protect, and he sees this new Battlestar, the Battlestar Galactica, as the opportunity for us to team up and win. Let's go fight the Cylons. Let's take the battle to them. The great thing about that two-parter from the original Battlestar Galactica is that everyone on the show suddenly fit into one of two sides. They were either on Commander Adama's side and said, listen, we have to run as far as we can, as fast as we can, because as soon as we lose one battle, the human race is extinct. And the other side felt like, no, wait a minute, hang on, there's a chance. We now have a second Battlestar. We could win. And there are other people who feel like it doesn't matter if we win or lose. I'm just tired of running. Even if it means we die, I want to die fighting, standing rather than living on my knees. It was a very complex issue. There wasn't a right or wrong answer. That's one of the great things I think about that central conflict. Of course, they ruined it in the remake because I think they completely misunderstood what made it cool in the first place. And when in the remake of Battlestar Galactica on the Sci-Fi Network, when we meet the commander of the Battlestar, Pegasus, and her crew, it's basically Battlestar asshole. And every single person on that ship, with maybe one exception, is just a huge raging dickhead. And so you don't have any sympathy for this. You never really feel that tension of, I don't know who's right. When Adama speaks, I believe in Adama. I think this person's right. And then when Kane speaks, I think, no, wait, they're right. That is a good central tension. Professor Xavier versus Magneto is a great central tension. They're both mutants. One of them thinks, listen, we have been persecuted. The human race, whom, by the way, we are not members of, the human race has an incredibly bad track record when it comes to this stuff. We need to create our own nation. That's Magneto's idea. But Xavier is a man of peace, and he's like, listen, we share this world with this other species. They're our friends. We need to be their allies. We need to help them understand that not to fear us. And when Magneto talks, when it's well written, when Magneto talks, you're like, yeah, I believe that guy. And then when Xavier talks, you're like, wait, no, I believe that guy. That, again, that is a good central tension. Now, that is a good central tension. Sometimes a good central tension has an obvious good guy and bad guy, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the kind of game you're running. And in fact, you can have a game where there's an obvious good guy and bad guy in the central tension, like, for instance, the North versus the South in the Civil War. But then you find out that the situations may be more complex, and this commanding officer, for instance, that you've hated for so long is somebody who's just defending his home against, he doesn't have any slaves. He doesn't believe in slavery, but he has to fight in order to stop the North from wiping out everything he owns and everything he knows and everyone he loves. We're discovering over the course of this video, I think, that there are a couple of different kinds of central tensions. There are some that have many different actors, like the clan war from L5R, and then there are others, and this is more common, where there are two sides to the story. And of those, I think we break them down into sides where there's good versus evil, and I think the Civil War is like that, right? The North are fighting to stop slavery, and the South are fighting to preserve this evil institution. But then you end up with stuff like the Cold War, and the Cold War started, I think, as good versus evil, because regardless of what you think of the United States, there was no one in the US who was like Joseph Stalin, right? So it starts off as good versus evil, but by the time you get to the 1970s, there's a lot of Cold War fiction that portrays them as just two different cultures that are at war. There's not necessarily a good or an evil side, and that I think is more sophisticated and more complex, and that's kind of like the Battlestar Galactica central conflict. I can't believe I just compared Battlestar Galactica and the Cold War, but we're talking about stories here. We're talking about fictions. A lot of these things are real things. The Civil War, Rome, the Cold War are all real things, but we are stealing from them dramatically. So that's central tensions. We've talked a little bit about that. Let's use the example from my campaign. I run a game and I tell players that the central tension of this campaign is order versus chaos, right? But that is exemplified in a couple of different ways. That's an abstract idea. And I think I said in an earlier video that the central tension of my campaign was order versus chaos. And these are such abstract high-level ideas that advice I think was basically useless, because I did not then go on to say that I described these two abstract concepts in many different ways. This conflict, order versus chaos, plays out on many levels, and most of these levels are the players are engaged and it's relevant, but they're not thinking in terms of order versus chaos. The first level is civilization versus wilderness. Civilization represents order. The wilderness represents chaos. And when I say the civilization represents order, I mean things like roads. Roads represent order. Roads are human beings taking the natural wilderness and imposing lines on them. Lines that go places, lines that are made of stone and cut through the hills. It's not only stuff like we have villages and towns and we have marshals and sheriffs and we have barons and kings. That is part of law, the idea that there are knights dispensing justice. It's also the fact that there are roads, that there are borders, that the natural chaos of nature, right? Natural chaos of nature, that the wilderness is completely random and just this unchecked growth, and it has a certain virtue. The elves think that the wilderness is highly virtuous, but humans think that the civilization is virtuous. So it's a central tension that is abstract at one level, order, law versus chaos, but then you start to drill down on it. And at the second level, we're talking about civilization, which we like. When you come to a village, even if it's a small village, the people there are terrified of everything outside their village, because everything outside their village represents the savage wilderness. But then there's a third level below those two, which is a little bit more personal, a little bit more relevant to the average person, and that is the death of Good King Omund. Good King Omund died 30 or 50 years ago. I'm not sure I've ever worked that out exactly, but within a human lifespan, there are still people alive who remember the reign of Good King Omund and the fact that he represented law. In other words, I've taken the idea of law, which is an abstract concept, and then we drill down on it a little bit. We say civilization, towns, cities, barons, kings, roads. These are more tangible, but then we go even farther down the ladder of being specific, and we say there's this person, good King Omund, and we hang on him the entire idea of law. When he was alive, you could move from one town to the other free. You didn't have to worry about being assaulted by goblins or bandits. You didn't have to worry about the breakdown of law. Good King Omund's death then represents the death of that tradition, the death of law, and the rise of chaos. So there are lots of people in the world who remember with fondness the rule of good King Omund, but really what they're talking about is they remember when law was in charge, and now chaos rules. That's how I take this abstract concept of order versus law, and I break it down into something that becomes ultimately very personal to a lot of people in the world. In fact, if you play a Dragonborn, nobody calls them the Dragonborn in my setting, they call them the Dragon Knights, because they were all created, kind of like Saruman created the Uruk-hai, they were all created by good King Omund's wizard, Vitae. Vitae made the Dragon Knights, and they are these symbols of law and justice. And if you play one in my game, then you end up dealing with the order versus chaos central tension all the time. But it's not abstract to you, it's super personal. Okay, so we're going to stop there because I was going to make a whole video just about politics, and we were going to talk about the central tension, and then there was going to be more after that. But I am starving. I haven't eaten all day. It's been a very busy day for me. My whole video schedule's been kind of messed up because, well, a couple of things. First of all, work at Turtle Rock Studios has become very complex. There's now a couple of different projects that I'm involved with to one extent or another, and keeping many plates spinning at work is somewhat difficult. But also at the same time, I am beginning the process of renovating this house, which means contractors are coming over and people giving me appraisals and inspections, and it's getting kind of crazy, and that is it is putting a hitch in my get along. So this video service that I provide to you, where I make videos about Dungeons and Dragons and occasionally movies, is going to be slightly sporadic and somewhat interrupted, but we're not going to stop, by the way. I have no intention of ever stopping because I love doing this. It just may not have the same. I mean, I made 3 videos just a couple of weeks ago. We did the 2001 video and the NPC video and a campaign diary. That was crazy. I think I basically have to stop doing the campaign diaries. We talked about this on Twitter and on my subreddit. The problem is that we play D&D every week. And so if I'm going to make a video about our game every week, that means I'm suddenly on the hook for 1 video a week that's just talking about my campaign. If I want to do something like do a running the game video, it becomes my second video that week. And I'm in a place right now where I just don't have time to do 2 videos a week regularly. So we're going to let the campaign diaries lie fallow, and then maybe we'll come back to them later once people are done destroying parts of my house and then rebuilding it. So this, it turns out, is the central tensions episode, where we talk about what makes a good central tension, and we talk about all the ways that a central tension can be useful and all the different kinds of conflicts that come out of one single tension, and all the different characters you can get out of it, all the different points of view. Next episode, and it should happen very quickly because literally I just want to go eat and then come back and start making more videos. But the next video is going to be how to take this central tension idea and sort of apply it on the ground. We're going to drill down one more level, and we're going to talk about things like the steady state world, which is what happened right before your campaign started, and the inciting incident. What happened that caused everything to go into disarray and create the conflict that is your central tension? So the second video, I think, is going to be sort of how to apply the lessons of the central tension in this video. And we're going to talk a little bit about war and peace, because I think these are classic ways in which how many of the central tensions that we talked about all happened during or because of a war? All of them, I think. Next episode, we're going to talk about how to apply the lessons of the central tension and turn it into something that is a little bit, I think, more useful and less abstract. Until then, I've got to go eat. Peace out. So I think we've discovered over the course of just this video that there's a couple of different kinds of central tension. There's the